A random schmuck like me watching the New York mayor debates. Come on, like how much hope could that give? Because imagine if he succeeds.
You can condemn speech without entering into authoritarianism. I mean, that's kind of what politicians just do naturally.
They don't have your Rice Krispies, then you could go somewhere else.
Welcome to Our National Conversation, a podcast in which we discuss politics from all angles. We are completely nonpartisan, and all views, respectfully stated, are welcome here. Our podcast is unique in that it is hosted and run by students who are focused on finding solutions to the biggest problems facing America.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Our National Conversation. The date today is July 6th. And we're going to be talking about Zohran Mamdani and kind of what he represents. I'm going to be talking to Joseph or Alano here, who is a self-described left-winger. You know, I kind of was talking to Joseph earlier about whether he might, support Mamdani. And I kind of said, this seems like a Joseph guy to me. And turns out, I was correct. So I want to dive into Joseph's perspective. What does Mamdani represent to him and to, kind of other people in his community, other, young left-wingers there. And then I want to talk about alternative perspectives, where we're not just dedicated to kind of assessing and interacting with left-wing perspectives here. So I want to talk about some things that I've heard conservative friends say. I want to talk about some stuff I've heard on Fox, all that jazz. But before we get into any of that, Joseph, how are you doing today?
Doing well. I'm pretty good. It's a beautiful Sunday afternoon, and glad to be here.
Awesome. Well, we're glad to have you. I feel pretty souped up for the discussion today. I actually didn't have, my audio wasn't working, and so I had to pull out, a gamer headset and everything, and I think it makes me feel more professional, I don't know. There's just something about this setup. I just like the sort of framing of it, but I mean, really, it's just some headset pulled off from the side here. And yeah, so we'll go ahead and get started there. So Joseph, I want to talk a little bit about, first of all, just why you like Mamdani. He's a very, I suppose, it's not that controversial to say he's a very controversial figure, in American politics today, even though it's just kind of localized to the city of New York. It has a lot of symbolic importance and might be a sort of testing ground, as some people have argued, for future democratic, politics on a local level across the country and maybe even nationally. So tell me a little bit about why you, left winger there in LA, why you think Mamdani is important, what you like about his campaign, what you like about his policies, and yeah, I just kind of want to hear it from you there.
I think first things first, it is refreshing to have somebody new in the scene. It is really refreshing. Zohran Mamdani, he is, I believe he's 33 years old, which is in the political world. He is a young pony. So he is the new guy on the scene. I think that is great. So I know before his campaign, he was an assembly member. So he does already have, government experience already. But what I already like him is that he was not funded by super PACs the person who was probably the guy who everyone thought was going to win was Andrew Cuomo, former governor of New York, Andrew Cuomo. And he had a billionaire backings. He was funded by DoorDash. He was funded by Michael Bloomberg. He was funded by all these other groups, and basically he was gonna be shoehorned in, oh, okay, so this is gonna be the guy. So we're just gonna do the song and dance, and we're just gonna wait for him to be elected. But no, Zohran Mamdani ran a really good grassroots campaign. He funded over millions of dollars from just I believe about 20,000 regular donors. So that's great. There are so many volunteers. It is refreshing, and it even brings me back to the good old days where I was on high on hopium. I was high on hopium on hope from back in 2020 when I thought, oh my God, Bernie's here. When Bernie originally ran, and but again, don't count your chickens, right? But anyway, he was really refreshing because he was truly the people's choice and not the billionaire PAC's choice. So it was so, he people like him because he ran on things that actually mattered. things that affect regular people like you and me. But he wanted to fund, but he wants to make public transportation free. He wants to make rent freezes. And honestly, that those are things that regular people love and want to hear, and these are also very popular ideas. Think of like a mother trying to work a job, and while a single mother trying to work a job while trying to raise kids. Do you think she'll care about something that she maybe doesn't understand, like the complexities of like capitalism and socialism or communism? No, she's gonna think, oh, cool. Like now, some of the, the 8-inch knife in my back was taken off 2 inches. Oh, that is at least great. Now I have, my rent is at least stabilized for now, and I would have, free public transportation. It was great. And you know how it works? At least here in California, when it was like COVID times, public transportation was also free. And guess what? LA didn't blow up. LA wasn't like, oh my God, there wasn't like bread lines or like, people like the metro system didn't die, didn't explode. So it was incredibly, uh, simple to fund. So that is great. Hopefully, I'm very jealous of New York, Sam. You have no idea. Like we need a Mamdani here in LA. Definitely need one in Orange County, and I'm so jealous. But I'm happy for them. I wish them all the best, and it kind of looks like he's gonna win too. Yeah.
Got it. Thinking about moving to the East Coast then, or
Oh man, dude, like you don't. I'm just so jealous, dude. You don't know. I am a very envious person. No,
yeah,
so I don't know. Maybe who knows? Who knows? Yeah.
yeah. Well, we'll have to see what happens in the future there. But I guess at the very least, if you're someone in LA who really likes Mamdani's politics, then better get to work
Exactly.
or continue working
No,
in LA.
yeah, a random schmuck like me watching the New York mayor debates. Come on, like how much hope could that give? Because imagine if he succeeds, Sam.
Mhm.
Imagine if he succeeds. This could really, unless something horrible happens, like I don't know, like if Andrew Cuomo runs independent and gets funded again like that, or if he gets assassinated or something. If something completely shocking happens, it really seems like he might actually win, and that might spark up more like-minded people who might run in other places. So we'll see what happens.
Yeah. Now, before I move on to my other questions, I want to ask because you talked there a lot about how Mamdani focused on tangible issues, things that affect, just kind of everyday Americans, bake that into sort of the narrative, right? That his campaign ran on. We aren't just, kind of fighting authoritarianism or fighting against the oligarchy or whatever else. We are focused on doing that through solving tangible issues that everyday Americans face, right? That's sort of the narrative there.
Wait.
But I've seen a very similar sort of explanation for the success of Donald Trump, and sort of the MAGA movement, that it really focused on tangible issues that people were experiencing. It focused heavily on trying to appeal to sort of working class Americans, bringing jobs back, Rust Belt, all that stuff. Um, I mean, do you, as someone who is on the left, um, do you think that that's something that applies to sort of both sides here? And do you see any, I suppose, virtue in the way the MAGA movement kind of went about its narrative, and how that seems to overlap in a lot of ways with what we're seeing in Mamdani, oddly enough? You know,
So the Trump campaign really did you know appeal to a working class conservative people. The thing that I really like, at least admire about the conservatives, is that they really do try to try to remain consistent in their messaging of saying, okay, there is a problem. There is a problem. You are getting screwed over. Everything, your life does suck. Everything sucks, but it isn't, say, the billionaires, or it isn't, but it oh, the reason why, you can't get any healthcare, why everything sucks, why there's crime in the city. It's not because of the city doesn't have proper it's not because of over policing or aggressive policing. It's definitely not because of we cut all the social safety nets. It is because of the gay trans Venezuelan people that eat cats or something like that. No, that's completely ridiculous. But they definitely at least acknowledge that there's a problem, and that's one of the things that I find very difficult about the Democratic Party's messaging. They're the party of just fighting against Trump. They don't really have any real problems, and that's why Zoran, he brings a problem that's actually facing real people. He gives the answers of like, oh, just the city is just not properly maintained. There is over policing. They're sending like he wants to bring in a new program where they bring in social workers to combat maybe someone having a mental health episode, and versus bringing like trigger happy angry armed men over someone legitimately having a health crisis. So there's that. And another thing is it's just the Democratic Party. Like think like they are not fighting real problems. Like you probably saw this, Sam. Do you like think about your local your local Congress member or your local state senator? You think they had more smoke for Mamdani than the disastrous big beautiful bill? They had more smoke for him than the melt the poor people bill that just passed. Like think of Chuck Schumer, who is a New York senator. What did he do? He renamed the bill. That's it. He renamed it. Like he all he did to fight it was to rename the bill, and I believe another guy, Hakeem Jeffries, kind of stalled the vote, and he just made a really long speech of saying, "Oh, this is why this is bad." But then has done nothing about it. But instead, you have other senators like Kirsten Gillibrand, another New York senator, who's basically smearing Mamdani instead of congratulating him because like he is an overwhelmingly popular guy on their side. So it's kind of ridiculous. You have Kirsten Gillibrand saying, "Oh, that he wants to bring like what did she say? Like, oh, that she wants to that Mamdani is a jihadist. Like literally bringing like unique racism terms that you haven't heard since like 9/11. Like it's really absolutely ridiculous, and they have truly been attacking Mamdani more than real problems. So I don't know. That's kind of ridiculous.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So let's dive into a few things there. I have a few things I want to push back on a little bit, and just sort of dive a little more into your views here, Joseph. So I guess the first thing that I want to talk about is I guess just right where you ended there. Democrats, not or at least mainstream Democrats, moderate Democrats, sort of established Democrats, we're not really doing a lot against the big beautiful bill and focusing instead on kind of I suppose demonizing Mamdani. Now, I myself, I haven't seen much demonization on the part of Democrats. I have seen hesitancy. And Mamdani himself has actually addressed this. In interviews, he said, I'm not really angry at established Democrats for not immediately backing me. This is a recent development, and there's some big shifts here. It's going to take people a while to digest things. I'm fine with that. I want to sort of work with them there. And I suppose I've just seen that hesitancy on the part of Democrats. Not quite say the degree of backlash that you see on like a Fox News roundtable or something like that, right? The second thing that I would push back on here is I'm not really sure what Democrats could have done more against the big beautiful bill, right? Like what else could they have done? Is there something in mind, Joseph, that you have like, no, they should have done this instead, or they should have used this procedure, or they should have fought harder on this. Like I'm just curious, like what else could they have done? You know, you know, you know.
Sorry about that little technical difficulties there.
Oh no, you're
I
good.
guess on the second part of what you said of what Democrats could have done. Here I want to be as accurate as possible for you, Sam. So I want to pull up something that I thought was really really interesting, and what was really what was really wild to me here.
Yeah,
I'm
please
sorry.
do. And if it takes a little
I
while
should
to
have.
pull something, if it takes a little while to pull something up, like we can just like cut it, and
Okay.
the audience will just skip that. So
Yeah. So okay, so here's the thing: the number of votes in the big beautiful bill passed by just two in the House,
mhm.
right? So here's the number of Democratic members of Congress who died in office this year was three. So this goes back to the first part of why I found Zoran Mamdani to be very refreshing in the political scene. That, like I said, he's 33 years old. He's a young pony in the political world, and this goes back to the Democratic Party's picks. They are in American politics. What's like the average age is in their late 60s, I believe. So basically, these out of touch geriatric, you know, just I'm sorry, but they're just geezers. They're these geriatric geezers. The president is what in his late 70s or early 80s, and Biden was also criticized for being a tired old man. That looked like he had to be that they had to inject him in with some sort of wake up serum as they roll him out of the freezer. So that's very so that was very bad. But here's the thing. To sidetrack a little, but it'll connect, but it's to sidetrack a little. But it'll connect later. I promise him. But I remember David Hogg. He's David Hogg. If you don't know, he is a school
An
shooting survivor,
activist,
and he's
kind
yeah,
of gun
and he's
control
an
activist. Yeah.
activist, and yeah, and he's also like a DNC talking head. He's in some council or
Mhm.
something like that. And basically, he would offer ideas of like, hey, we should bring in new people. You guys are too old. Your guys' messaging sucks. And he was booted out because of that. He was booted out for being ageist and just not agreeable to the current party. So he was booted out, and I'm sorry, but he's right. So the like you have three Democratic Congress members who are just so old, and they sadly pass away through like age-related complications, and so losing by three. The people that died this year, the big beautiful bill could have been stalled at least at that time. So it just shows more that like the Democratic messaging that 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 it needs to be the Democratic Party needs a facelift. It kind of needs to be purged in new people with fresh and popular ideas. Popular ideas like free healthcare, free education, very, very popular ideas, and but they fight tooth and nail. Like they fought, like literally. You probably remember this, Sam. They fought Bernie more harder than they fought Trump. So it's kind of ridiculous. You have companies like DoorDash and billionaires like Michael Bloomberg, funding intern hair sniffer Andrew Cuomo, who has again resigned in disgrace because he was a creep to his staff. I mean, come on. No, and obviously, they're trying to get rid of current mayor Eric Adams, who you also probably remember that he was under all sorts of these investigations of corruption as well. So
Yep.
who do you think the choice is? The guy who just wants, free public transportation, or these creeps. So no. So I think the Democratic Party just really needs to look at itself in the mirror and just get with the times. Like this is a ridiculous. So yeah, so if it had changed, if the Democratic Party was ran by people who believe in these popular things, then they probably would have eventually passed the big beautiful would have fought against the big beautiful bill because they would have brought in fresh young people. So
Okay.
yes.
Mm. Well, thank you for sharing that, kind of clarifying your perspective there. Um, I'm curious, like, what the effects have actually been if these people didn't pass away? Like, are there seats now just given to New Democrats at this point, or so would it not have changed kind of the actual share of votes? Like, would those districts have flipped, Democrat, et cetera? I mean, it's difficult to deal in counterfactuals, but you're certainly right that
Mindset is
maybe
funny.
there was a possibility, that something else could have happened, and so maybe being a little tougher on this particular issue, really trying to focus on people who are physically apt for office, you know, would have made a difference. It's difficult to tell. Um, but let's dig into a few more things you said here. I'm gonna, I guess one thing that I'm just thinking as you're speaking, Joseph, and I fall into this trap all the time, and it's very, very, it's a very appealing trap, right? And it seems to me that it's to make whatever the other side is on some particular issue, like look just as stupid as possible. Like these are people who are, they're it really like kind of going back to your earlier comment. Maybe what a lot of conservatives or MAGA people are is it's people who are creating a narrative that blames the plights of working class voters on LGBTQ cat eating Venezuelans. And that's obviously pretty freaking ridiculous. And there are some conservatives and Republicans who will say things that are pretty much exactly just that. But there's also a vast swath of differing kind of gradations of that, right? Republicans, and conservatives and MAGA Republicans who will say things more, maybe more nuanced, more moderate, and with a greater degree of, I suppose, plausibility. So what I want to do is I want to dig into a little bit of that. And then we can start getting into maybe a little bit later some concerns that more moderate Democrats have raised with respect to Mamdani's policies. Because I think you're right to criticize the ludicrous where it exists, but I also think that it's important to recognize that oftentimes the ludicrous is constrained to like the media's melodic round tables, people who are just looking for ratings, and then politicians saying really offhanded things, again for the sake of kind of stoking that anger, right, and just getting more attention. So let's dive into kind of as I said, the Republican and conservative critiques of Mamdani first. I think the biggest sticking point right now that I'm seeing most of is whether Mamdani deserves the label of communist, and if so, what does that actually mean? Right? What does that mean in terms of his policies? What does that mean in terms of the Democratic Party more broadly? If it starts to go more with this Mamdani-like structure and sort of platform. So I know Fox and a number of other conservative outlets have focused a lot on one particular clip of Mamdani where he was speaking at a Young Democratic Socialists of America like conference sort of thing. I actually went back. It took a little bit of digging, but I found the whole like 30 to 40 minute interview. Actually watched through, and saw that quote on context. And I was worried that Fox, these other outlets would be pulling it completely out of context, and really it's a lot more, I suppose, moderate, in the full interview there. But actually, it's maybe they're misinterpreting the term, but at the very least, they didn't pull it completely out of context here. The term was seizing the means of production, right? The sort of phrase there, and he labeled that as one of the goals of kind of democratic socialists, right? Got to seize the means of production, etc. Talk a lot about class consciousness, social housing, all that jazz. You hear these terms thrown around. So when Republicans and conservatives hear that, they obviously think, okay, this is Marxism, this is communism, this is kind of like socialist extremism that's going to grip our country. There's different ways to interpret that. Even the phrase "seize the means of production," we can interpret that in different contexts. Does it mean the same thing to a communist or Marxist-Leninist as it does to a democratic socialist like Mamdani? So we can get into that a little bit. But at the very least, there's these criticisms levied and these worries, that aren't completely ludicrous. They have some historical basis there. So I just want to ask you, Joseph, to start us off. When you hear the term democratic socialist, obviously a lot of Republicans and conservatives, they hear that, they think communism with kind of a modernized disguise. When you hear that, what do you think? And like, what comes to mind? If this is something you would want to vote for, what do you think it is? And what do you think its relationship is to this thing that we label communism? Or maybe multiple things we label communism. Just where's your headspace at there?
I think, in a nutshell, democratic socialism is just regulated capitalism. That's it. I believe like that's probably as simple in a nutshell way to describe it is just regulated capitalism. Because you have these other Icelandic countries who are also democratic socialist countries. And do you see, mass poverty there? No. It is just something like that country invests in itself. That country invests in itself. That's why there are vast social safety nets over there in Europe and specifically the Icelandic countries like over there. And you see that there is none of the harsh problems as they face here. So one of my favorite things of how they try to critique communism because sometimes these when they talk at these roundtables or if you see them on Twitter or things like that, they try to show us an image of like, oh, these, it sucks, these poorly run cities, these, vast homelessness and drug abuse. They say this is what communism will look like under Mamdani's New York. But in reality, like that's capitalism today. That's capitalism now, and that is currently Eric Adams' New York. Like it looks like Mamdani might win, but it's not his New York yet. It's not, and things like that. And to speaking of, like you said, the seasons and means of production, he wants to do that in a very, very limited and specific sense. Like he just wants to bring up a few state-run grocery stores. Oh my God, no! Just state-run grocery stores. Look, I like the it's a grocery store and he wants to make free public transportation. That doesn't sound like a socialism, communism hellhole. You could still get your like I don't know what do they eat over there? Hot dogs. Over there they could get a bagel. You could still get a bagel. You're not gonna get a communism bagel. You're not gonna be like, okay, I got my daily rations. I'll go into the salt mines now. It will still be the same like there is nothing that will I don't know how to say it other than it's not gonna be a big deal, Sam. I promise it's not gonna be he just wants to implement a few state-owned grocery stores and now some of the critique of that, they say, "Oh, what if it drives out other small businesses?" I don't think it's gonna do that any worse than a Walmart opening down the street. I don't think I think a mom and pop coffee shop is in more danger of a Starbucks opening in the corner, instead of maybe a sprinkled in few state-run grocery stores. So no, I'm not worried about that, and I don't think New Yorkers will be as will I don't even want to say the word affected because it has like a negative way of sounding. Like no, I don't think that New York is not gonna explode because of a few state-run grocery stores or things like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so let's dig into that a little more because kind of going back to my original point, I think there's two ways to address this. Either we can critique the way like the Fox talking heads, discuss this issue. I think that's pretty easy to do. Um, but I also think that there's maybe people who are worried about some of these policies that aren't expecting New York to explode. They aren't expecting the New York's economy to collapse because Mamdani becomes mayor. But they are maybe worried about whether these policies will be effective, whether they'll be expanded into things that affect people a little more, and just overall whether this is the right trajectory for not only the city, but cities throughout the United States, the Democratic Party as a whole, etc. So let's maybe address those two things separately. First, I do agree. Just talking a little more about like Fox specifically and so forth. Just some of the roundtables I've seen there, like oh gosh, it's just for ratings, right? And I mean, you see this to a degree, like on both sides. This is just how news discussions work. But yeah, like people saying that Mamdani is a Marxist communist, who wants to install a Stalin-esque dictatorship. It's and there's not a lot of precedent for that. I'm not seeing the evidence. Even going back to that interview, right, which credits to Fox, they didn't entirely take it out of context. He did, in fact, say, yeah, that's a goal of democratic socialism to seize the means of production. And that's obviously something that's used a lot in classical Marxism as a phrase. But like even so, that doesn't mean that he's, as you said, Joseph, like he's not taking it to that full extent, right? I think full-fledged communism, it's a matter of the magnitude of the policies, right? How far-reaching they are, whether they're kind of totalizing, right, nationalization of all these industries, etc. That's where you get the bread lines, all that stuff. But if we're just talking about like installing some like a better safety net, some more welfare states, some more at least publicly owned grocery stores, which seem to have done fairly well as far as I can tell in rural communities in Kansas. Um, so there's that at least. That's not communism. That's not Marxism. That's not Marxist Leninism. All this stuff. So I think that we can make a distinction there. I think democratic socialism, it is, as you said, sort of a regulated mixed economy. And the degree to which that exists, it's probably going to vary from democratic socialist to democratic socialist, but that's the way I see it. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I don't know enough about this topic. I don't have a PhD in political theory or economics. But that's my current understanding. And it seems that we agree on that front. But now I think let's get a little into maybe some of the more, I guess, just reasonable concerns that some would have. They're not like some crazy, like talking head pandering to whatever gets the most ratings. They're not going off about something that doesn't even relate to this issue. They're not saying New York's going to explode. They're just worried that maybe as a matter of fact, implementing these grocery stores does lead some billionaires who have grocery store chains to go to Florida or New Jersey or somewhere else, and just out of protest or whatever else. And suddenly it's a little harder to get groceries because maybe now the state, run grocery stores or city run grocery stores aren't quite as effective because of government bureaucracy and its issues. And so maybe it doesn't actually solve the problem and people can't really get groceries easier, and there's a huge debate over things like that. And you get into the economics of it. Does it work? Does it not? And of course, there's the fiscal issues. How is Mamdani going to pay for this? Well, he wants to raise taxes on certain, obviously, the top 1%. There were some other taxes he talked about. The governor said, I'm not really down for that. That's no starter for me. We're not going to do those taxes. He's still hoping that they can get a compromise or kind of build a coalition, get some ground there. So I guess, Joseph, what do you say to, say, a Republican or even like a moderate Democrat who has some of these more just reasonable worries about these policies? It doesn't really think that they're feasible, even if they're not going to cause the city to explode. Maybe they'll be a net negative and won't do a lot of good and might affect some people's lives in a harmful way.
I think there are two ways that you can approach this. First, speaking of, the idea of, let's just say in this scenario, there are people leaving and there might be saying, oh, well, where are we going to get our groceries now? Well, I think another thing that you could look to is how disastrous these tariffs were. You could see that the this administration really kind of really kind of destroyed grocery stores. Everything's more expensive. Everything's more expensive. The price of eggs skyrocketed.
It's always the
Uh,
price of eggs.
Oh yeah, like it's freaking it's always the price of eggs, but it's true. It's kind of ridiculous.
Mhm.
But yeah, so and of course, like a carton of orange juice that's expensive these days. Milk, forget about it. So it's all so the grocery stores has been attacked before, but they are still here despite this disastrous administration. So the implementation of a few grocery stores, I don't think is gonna completely, affect other chains as drastically as, big mega stores like, Walmart or Target or other, other businesses that already threaten small businesses like Starbucks or Terra Coffee or things like that. So, and the second one I want to talk about is there's already a sort of a state funded or state assisted grocery stores. At least here in Los Angeles, there's a WIC program where there's dedicated stores that you could only shop at with your WIC monies. A WIC is a social program that of young families use when they have like a new baby. Other than like food stamps and stuff, there's also WIC programs that you know you could buy like baby formula, you know, a certain non-sugar cereals and milk and things like that. So that did not, you know, there's still local stores here. There's still carnicerias. There's still other you know, grocery chains here in Los Angeles, and WIC did not destroy that either way. So, and again, if you really don't want, you know, like, cause me personally, you know, I don't have a child, but I don't go to Wix store. Like, say if I did, you know, I have younger siblings, so I have gone to a Wix store before, you know, with my mother, who, you know, when my siblings were younger. And I didn't like going there because, oh, they didn't have my favorite cereals. You know, they didn't have, you know, like I said, the sugar cereals when I was a kid. So guess what? If you don't like the state-run grocery stores because they don't have, you know, Captain Crunch Oops All Berries, then, you know, or they don't have your Rice Krispies, then you could go somewhere else. You know, and again, you know, this is just something that Zoran Mamdani wants to do. And guess what? If it doesn't work, then I guess it doesn't work. But the idea of that it's gonna kill small businesses, I don't think that's accurate. No, not at all.
Yeah. That's yeah. Well, I think there are you hit on a very crucial advantage that I think this policy has. You know that I would imagine in theory, you know, if it weren't for just like partisan commitments that most everyone could acknowledge, and that's sort of implementing kind of a trial program, right? Like this isn't like okay, nationalization of grocery stores now, or you know, citywide, everything's run, you know, by the city council and so forth, and the mayor. Um, it's just we're gonna try out these five grocery stores, and I mean, you know, maybe it just remains five grocery stores there as sort of a you know, kind of a safety net there in the city. And, you know, at least from what I know about policy, it's not going to be like immensely expensive, you know, compared to the overall city budget. Try it out, see if it works, study it. You know, how does it compare to what Kansas has done in rural areas? You know, does it work? Does it not? And just see what happens. You know, I think that there's something to be said there. And I mean, I think that this is really, you know, when you get down to it, at least a kind of more classical conservatism. This is a pretty big component of the ideology. It's that caution in policy, right? If we're going to make changes, make them in a way that's more somber, reasoned, and gradual, right? You kind of have the trial programs with policy. You test things out, you test the waters, then see if you want to implement it further. You kind of assess things fully. You know, nothing that's super like a huge radical shift in policy. And you know, even though Mamdani is maybe somewhat of a radical shift in rhetoric and platform, the actual tangible policies, you know, they don't seem all that, you know, like out there and crazy. It's more like even if they would be pretty crazy if they were implemented at a higher magnitude, you know, it does seem kind of more that just testing, you know, and for someone who is kind of unsure on this issue, like I don't know what the effects are going to be of the grocery stores. I honestly don't know if it's more probable that they're going to work and be great, or if it's more probable that no, they're going to drive out some businesses and it's not going to be a super great situation. It's going to be a drain on the, you know, the city's budget. I don't know. I don't know if I'm not like an expert economist, or even if I don't need to be an expert economist to have an opinion on that, but I just haven't researched it well enough, you know, to have an opinion on that. Maybe you have, Joseph. But you know, me personally, I just think having like a trial run of a policy like this is really, really useful to just move the debate forward, right? Because if you don't try anything, then you don't really see what works and what doesn't, and it all stays in ideologically motivated theory, right? And that's kind of an issue there. So, let's maybe focus away from some of Mamdani's policies because we're running a little out of time here, and address something else, and that's maybe less of the economic side of things, less of who's right on whether, you know, some moderate democratic socialism works or doesn't, you know, and focus a little more on something, you know, pertaining to free speech that Mamdani has talked about and or been kind of implicated in. So obviously there's this phrase, globalize the Intifada, right? Now I'm no scholar on Islam, and I'd imagine, based on what I know about this, that this can mean slightly different things to different groups of people. But at least in our American context, this is heavily associated with violent jihadism, right? Um, and sort of, you know, movements of violence against Jewish people, right? And Mamdani has not explicitly condemned this statement, right? He said, like kind of when asked about this, right? He kind of diverts a little bit and almost like implicitly says he's against this statement and saying, no, I'm for universal human rights. That applies to Israelis and Palestinians equally, all that stuff. He talks about talking with Jewish constituents, things like that. But he doesn't ever like specifically say, I'm against this particular statement, right? Like I condemn this. Now, there's been a number of explanations for this. One thing that I've heard is that, well, because the Republicans are focusing so heavily on this and really trying to police language that's used by, student activists and so forth, Mamdani doesn't really want to like put additional pressure on that. And so I've heard that. I don't know that I'm entirely convinced by that. I mean, it seems to me that you can kind of side with student groups that are advocating for Palestinian rights while still clarifying, but hey, I am very much against this violence and this phrase insofar as it is used to promote violence. I'm against that and condemn it. I mean, a lot of Democrats and progressives, they condemn hate speech very, very frequently and very ardently. And I don't know. I just kind of worry if a certain mode of what we would classify as hate speech is politicized to the point where you're going to criticize, one group for saying, violent things or things that can easily be interpreted as violent, but not another group for doing so. That I don't know, that creates a sort of maybe perception of hypocrisy. And whether that's Mamdani's intention or not, I can't say. But at the very least, I don't know that I fully understand kind of his particular stance on this, and not wanting to condemn speech because he's worried it's going to police things more and move against free speech and be more authoritarian. But I mean, you can condemn speech without entering into authoritarianism. I mean, that's kind of what politicians just do naturally. So I don't know. I don't know that I completely buy his responses to this. So this is one area where I think Republicans and conservatives might have more of a point on kind of Mamdani's rhetoric. And yeah, I don't know. Like, I'm not going to characterize Mamdani as anti-Semitic, but some of what he said here, I don't know quite how to make sense of it. So how do you interpret this, Joseph? What are you thinking when you hear this sort of debate? And would you side with Mamdani here? Would you say, no, he's making a mistake? What do you think?
Globalize the Intifada is an emancipatory slogan.
Mhm.
Intifada in Arabic means uprising.
Mhm.
And it's a slogan of, it's in a resistance slogan. It's more like, hey, you know, it's not over. You are getting crushed, but believe in yourself. It's not a and it's not a slogan of death. It's a slogan for to resist and survive. That's what intifada means. Now, there has been a lot of, debate whether Zohran Mamdani is anti-Semitic or not, but I think he has described himself, and I believe as well that he is just anti-Zionist. Now, I think it's kind of dangerous to conflate Jewishness with Zionism or Jewishness with the state of Israel.
Yeah.
It is. I think it's honestly not a good idea for conservatives to sort of say things like that, to conflate like, oh, this is what all Jewish people believe. They co-sign this when in reality there are many Jewish voices who are against the genocide that's happening there, happening in Gaza, and the apartheid, horrible things that are happening in the West Bank as well. So no, it's very dangerous, and I think conflating Jewishness and the with Zionism and the Israeli government, well, honestly, will create anti-Semitism because, you know, if people make that connection of like, oh, that it is the Jews doing the genocide instead of the Israeli government doing the genocide, then that will create anti-Semitism. So it is not no, you should not do that, and it is a very dangerous thing to do. Not only is it just untrue that Zoran believes in what the death of Jews, no, in fact, he regularly gets pushed on that in the mayoral debate. Like there, I'm sure you know where I'm going with this, but there is this question of they asked everyone, if you were elected, where would you go? One guy said, "Oh, I'll go to Israel. I'll go to the Holy Land. Oh, I'll make my fourth trip to Israel." And you have Andrew Cuomo. He's wearing a ribbon, and then you have another guy wearing a bigger a yellow ribbon. Maybe that's why Andrew Cuomo lost. He didn't have a big enough ribbon.
There you go.
Something like that. But no, Zoran Mamdani said, no, I will be the New York mayor. My focus is on New York. My focus is on the issues facing New Yorkers and how, like that's my focus, not on another country that has nothing to do with New York. So no, that's they always seem to press him on that. Sometimes they say things like, "Oh, well, do you believe in the Jewish state?" Now, even that is a loaded question as well. I think he answers it very clearly of saying he believes in a state with equal rights for everyone. And for that being a controversial statement, it just really shows of how bad things are going on over there and what's the mindset of people who do believe in Zionist ideologies.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah, no, I think there's a number of important points there. Um, and like obviously, if we're overgeneralizing a group of people and conflating them with a particular government, state, or ideology, and we're talking about like an ethnic group of people, that's very, very dangerous territory. I don't think that should be a controversial point there that you just made, Joseph. Um, I, you also, as kind of you noted, and I think this is accurate just from what I've heard, what I've seen, what I've read. Again, no expert on this. I'm not a religious scholar, but that the term intifada, it means different things to different people, and as a general rule, it means kind of that as that emancipatory message. And some people, some groups are going to interpret that as, well, in order to engage in emancipation, we have to kill X, Y, and Z groups of people, right? But I mean, that's a pretty minor component of the overall population, right, of Muslims there. And so I think that just that point adds a greater degree of nuance to this whole debate, right? Because Mamdani, in refusing to condemn this statement itself, doesn't necessarily mean that he's siding with jihadists, right? Or as you say, it doesn't mean that he's anti-Semitic. But it's just an indication that he I don't know, like he acknowledges that this is a very, very this is a statement with a lot of very, very diverse interpretations. And if you just condemn the statement as a whole, you're condemning all of those interpretations, and that doesn't really work. Like he himself might believe in one interpretation of that, right, as a Muslim man, but again, that doesn't mean that he's anti-Semitic. Um, so what I wish could happen is maybe if he could say something like, I condemn that phrase insofar as it is taken to mean, we need to kill Jewish people and Christians and other groups, right? But I don't condemn the phrase as a whole because it means different things to different people, right? Now, maybe there's some strategic reason why he doesn't go into that, right? Maybe I heard someone say this, if you're explaining things in communications and politics, that means you're losing, right? If you have to like kind of take a step back and sort of clarify, no, I don't really mean that. I mean this. Like you're on the defensive, and so maybe it's strategic for him to then just refocus back. No, let's talk about New York. Let's talk about affordability. I believe in universal human rights. That's that. Now let's talk about these issues. But I don't know. I just wish that I guess I just wish that wasn't the case, that he could actually just say honestly, here's what I think, here's the nuance of it. Now let's talk about affordability. And I guess I'm not entirely sure why that happens, but then again, I'm not a political strategist. I'm not in there like, thinking what's the best way to frame this message to get the most people on board or to create the most impact, passion, authenticity, or sense of that. So I'd imagine there's a lot of those meetings there. But, I think Republicans and conservatives, they have a valid concern on this, but maybe it's a concern born from a lack of understanding of the overall phrase and what that actually means for Mamdani and what he believes in. Obviously, that could be that lack of information could be politically weaponized quite readily. All right. Well, we're running out of time here. In fact, we are pretty much out of time. So, Joseph, I just want to thank you for coming on. This was just me trying to kind of understand why is Mamdani making people, younger left-wingers really excited? What does he bring to the table? What do you think about conservative and Republican arguments against him? Both kind of the crazy stuff, said on like Fox talking shows or whatever, and the more moderate stuff, that just everyday conservatives are worried about here, and moderate Democrats as well. So there's a gazillion more things we could talk about. We could dive into these issues a lot more, but I just want to thank you for the time that you've given me, the little bit of ground we've covered here, just at least for our own sakes. And I wish you a great rest of your day, and I want to have you on in the future.
Yeah, great. It's always great hanging out with you, Sam. Yeah, love being here. Love talking with you. And I thought we covered some real good ground and unraveled some things. Yeah.
Awesome. All right. Well, have a great day, Joseph. And for anyone
All
who's
right.
watching this, if they're like, I don't know, sometimes you get just like 5 people watching a video. Other times, for whatever reason, it jumps up into a few thousand or something like that. It's very sporadic. But I mean, if you're one of those 5 people watching this and you like the discussion, tell us why you didn't like it. Tell us why you want to add more. Build off of what Joseph and I said. Tell us why we're wrong on something. Please do. But as much as possible, try to keep the conversation civil. That'll attract our attention a whole heck of a lot more. But yeah, until next time, and have a great rest of your day, everyone.
This podcast was brought to you by Our National Conversation, a place where students generate policy solutions to the biggest problems facing America. Join us in freeing political dialogue from hyperpartisanship. To learn more about what you heard today, check us out at ournationalconversation.org. You can also follow us on social media at Our National Conversation to show your support and keep up with our latest efforts.